Surf Splendor.
That house looks modern and cool. Did you build that yourself?
Well, not with my own two hands, but yes, I managed the build of it. Yeah, I have a few houses in Central America, but this is the only one that's not like infested with scorpions and potentially a snake in the roof. This is my like nice house.
Did you design it?
I did.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Yeah.
If
This is the house that in this area of Costa Rica, I never saw myself living. I think I told you when we were in person, I only really live here because there's school and activities for the kids. And so this house was designed as not my forever home. This is the house I'm going to live in for the next, 5 to 8 years. And then the idea is then to sell it. So a lot of the design features were not necessarily things that I wanted, although I am enjoying them, but it's with the eye to like have value to be able to sell it.
got it. Um, that level of planning and forethought seems to be a theme in your life, which is
I
impressive.
mean, I don't know. There's some balance there, I think, of having kids. I mean, having kids requires one to think a little further ahead, and particularly trying to have kids in Central America and like figure out how to give them the good opportunities that I want to give them and not just be selfishly focused on where I'm going to get the best waves requires some level of advanced planning.
Well, good on you. It's impressive. And you would hope that all parents feel that same way, but I know a lot of them do not execute to the level that you have. So good on you. Um, do you have to wrap this up at any specific time?
No.
Do we have like an hour, 90 minutes or so?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Feel free if you need to take a break or a phone call or whatever, bathroom break, let me know when we can edit it
Okay,
out.
well, yeah, there might be somebody showing up to pick up some bags of cement, but my daughter is homesick, so I've instructed her what to do if they do
Okay.
show. Yeah.
Yeah, no sweat if you need to handle it. Let's go back to the very beginning. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Palos Verdes, which is southern LA County, which is pretty nice spot to grow up. But my parents weren't beach people, so even though Palos Verdes is coastal, it's actually like we didn't live in the part that was on the beach. So I didn't really discover the beach until I was a little bit older and at least surfing. I didn't get into surfing until I was like 14 years old. And once I did, I was like, oh my God, how did I miss this the rest of my life?
What were your parents doing professionally? How did they land in PV?
My dad's a lawyer. He was like a managing partner for a big law firm in downtown LA. And my mom just wanted to have babies. She was like very old school, like she was a model, the captain of the cheerleading squad, and her like dream in life was to marry a rich husband and have a bunch of babies, which she succeeded in doing because I'm the oldest of five girls, and we lived a very comfortable like upper middle class lifestyle in a big house, and I had horses growing up, and yeah, we had a really nice safe upbringing that just didn't really involve the beach.
How did you discover surfing then?
Well, actually, it's funny. There was an accidental magazine, Surfer magazine got accidentally delivered to our house. It was like the same street like number, but like the wrong street. And I think I was in middle school, and I remember like pulling it out of the mailbox and being like, "Oh my God, like what is this?" And I was just instantly obsessed. And my grandparents lived in Laguna Beach. And so when we were kids, I did spend some time like at the beach, but we were going to like, Balboa and like places where there wasn't really surf. So I knew that I loved the water, and I was a water baby. I swam at the YMCA. We had a pool in the backyard. But it was really when that magazine showed up at the house that I feel like I discovered surfing. And then I was just like, I want to do this. This is what I want to do. And I my early entrepreneurial spirit, I think in middle school we got this like it was like you could sell greeting cards door to door and there were prizes, and one of the prizes was a skateboard. And so I like went around to the neighborhood selling greeting cards, and people were like, is this for school? And I said no. And then they wouldn't buy it. And then like everybody else, I was like, this is for school. And I did enough until I could like earn the skateboard and like sent away in the mail for it. And the skateboard showed up. And then I discovered at my grandparents' house in the rafters of their garage, there was this old surfboard. And I think it was, I can't even remember the brand. It was some obscure brand. And it had like the fins that were like right on the tail,
Hmm.
like back in the 60s. And I was like, where did that come from? And my grandma was like, oh, it's your uncle's old board. It's been in the garage for 30 years. Like, feel free to take it. And I asked my mom, can I have it? And she said, no. Surfing's for boys. You are never going to get a boyfriend that way. You need to be sitting on the beach in your bikini, looking cute, not out there competing with the boys. And I was just so like determined and started saving up babysitting money. And then I found a surfboard at a garage sale and she couldn't say no. And that was it.
Did they maintain a certain reticence about you embracing the surf lifestyle?
100%. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I had bought the board myself, there wasn't really a lot that they could say. Like I
Yeah.
wasn't encouraged to get rides to the beach, but by this point I was 14, 15. So I had friends that had driver's license. I'm also really young for my grade. So I had friends that were in my own grade that already had their licenses. And luckily, my high school had a surf PE option. So I forged my mom's signature to change my schedule to move into surf PE. And then it was a grade, it was a class. Like I can't not go. I have to, this is, if I don't go, like I'm not showing up to PE. And I was really lucky to have a friend that passed by my house on his way to the beach that would pick me up and take me. And yeah, it was in some ways, when I look back on it, I mean, obviously, I wish I'd started earlier. I think everybody that starts surfing, and if they weren't like children, wishes that they started earlier. But in a lot of ways, I think it gave me a drive that maybe I wouldn't have had otherwise. Like I have friends now who like grew up surfing with their families and then they went to college in a landlocked area because they were like, whatever, surfing. But for
Yeah.
me, it was like it had been such a struggle to get access to a surfboard, to get rides to the beach, that once I started, I it was like it was everything.
If your kid's going to rebel in any direction, that's a good thing for them to embrace in their rebellion.
Yeah, for sure. I remember my dad would like take me to the beach sometimes because he could not wrap his head around the fact that I actually was going surfing. And he had this like idea of what surfing was, and it was like partying and whatever. And he's like, wait, you're going to go to the beach in the dark and get in the freezing cold water? Like, there's no way that's actually what you're doing. And then when you would
Yeah.
drive me to the beach and see me doing that, he's like, oh, okay. I guess you are actually doing that. Interesting.
Yeah, that is, I've never thought about it, but for myself, I think that my parents might have appreciated the discipline that was required to do what you just said. I think it evolved for me to then I was ditching class later, a couple of years later, and they probably weren't too cool about that. But getting up early in the morning, if you're at class by 8 a.m., who cares what you do at 6 a.m., if it's an activity like that. So do you remember has there ever been a moment up until this day where your mom actually embraced your career path and your choices?
Yeah, it wasn't that much longer. It wasn't that long after that. I got sponsored by Rusty when I was, what was I? I think it was the right before my senior year of high school. And it was just this like random series of events that had me going to Cabo for a Rusty sales meeting.
Hmm.
And I thought I was going as a surfer, but I was actually going as a model. And all of a sudden, I was like in Cabo with these other girls that were models. And then I was like, well, can I go surfing like with the sales reps? And it turned into a sponsorship. But the photo that they got from that trip that ended up running as an ad in Surfer magazine was me standing in a red bathing suit holding my surfboard. And when that came out, and then my mom saw it, she's like, oh, you're a model. Okay. And then she's like buying a ton of magazines and giving them out to all her friends. And, at that point, she didn't care about the surfboard. It was like, oh, you're a model and you're in magazines. And now I guess this is a good thing and I'll support it.
Did you have this awareness when this was all happening in real time that that's what your mom was embracing as opposed to just a wholesale embracing?
100%,
Oh,
yes,
you
because
did.
it
Okay.
was really like it was an overnight shift in her attitude that started with that photo coming out.
Gotcha. Interesting. So let's get back into the high school formative years a little bit. How quickly was your, I mean, obviously it's a quick progression from learning to surf to ending up with Rusty. Were you competitively inclined? Did that only happen through competitions? What were the options as you were getting better at surfing?
Well, yeah, I mean that first summer I learned to surf, I like kept my board at a friend's house and so that I could go to her house and then her mom would take us to the beach or her sister would take us to the beach. And I had this like horrendous spring suit tan. It was so disgusting, but I was so proud of it because it marked me as like a surfer. And I
Yeah.
was like such a tomboy too. And I remember when I went back to school in September, this older boy heard me explaining to the other girls who were making fun of my tan. I was like, oh, this is my spring suit tan because I learned to surf this summer. And he was like, wait, you surf? Because we need another girl on the surf team. And it was just like every girl on the team gave them a point, didn't matter if I was good or not. And that was the guy that would pick me up and take me to the beach. And he was the captain of the team. And it was very self-serving, but it worked out great for me. So I was like thrust immediately into competition. And the South Bay in that era in particular of surfing, we're talking like 94, 95, like women surfing wasn't what it is now. I mean, that was like the early days of Lisa Anderson and the board short for girls and all of that. So there wasn't a lot of competition. And I'm a very competitive person. And like I said, when I got into surfing, I was like all in. And I think I got second place in my first ever like high school contest. And all I wanted to do was win. And so a couple of the boys really like took me under their wing. And I was a Christian at the time. And it was like the boys from church that really like supported me and took me to the beach and helped me out. But then there was like this other crew of boys, like the Lanada Bay boys, and a lot of them who like eventually were somewhat famous in the if you pay attention to the Lanada Bay lawsuits that are going on right now. Like Alan Johnson was my grade, and those guys were not friendly to me at all. And I think that there was this crucial time where I got invited to a party and I didn't go because I was a Christian and I didn't drink or party in that way. And I think they felt rejected. This is me looking back on it. And so then they responded by being complete assholes and made it really hard. And then when I went and got sponsored by Rusty, I think there was also like a jealousy component because now I'm the one in Surfer Magazine with this killer Rusty board. And so there was definitely like a lot of rejection. And I think that in a lot of ways like fueled me even more because I wasn't cool. I was a nerd and I was a Christian and I didn't go to the parties, but I was winning the women's division in like the high school surf league. And so that was kind of my way of like having an identity. And, my mom was like, I wasn't good enough. I wasn't girly enough. I wasn't cool enough, but if I could win, then that gave me value to the team. And then, yeah, I started doing NSSA as well. Like I think I started surfing right before my junior year. That's right. And then by my senior year, I was doing NSSA contests. And I never thought like pro surfing was a thing. Like it wasn't a thing for women in those days,
Yeah.
really. There were so few women that ever, even in the magazines that I saw. And it wasn't until I went to college, I went to UCSD, and I had become friends with Jim Rusi, who's a photographer in the surf industry, and he's from Palos Verdes and he was a Christian, and we had met just like at the local beach, and I'd gone to church with him a couple of times, and he invited me to go on a trip to Puerto Escondido my freshman year of college. And it was like a last minute trip for me where somebody had like dropped out and couldn't make it. And he invited me to like 3 days before the trip. And it was like Frida Zamba and Prue Jeffries and these other girls. And I had been surfing for like 3 years. And now I'm on the photo trip to Puerto Escondido with Jim Rusi and, four-time world champ Frida Zamba. And it was on that trip that I realized, like, number one, oh my God, this is amazing. And these girls are way better than me, but maybe the gap isn't as big as I thought. And maybe there is the potential for me to like have a future in surfing. Like I just didn't even know that that was a future for anybody, let alone myself. So as they were all going off to Australia or whatever, I was going back to sit in lecture hall and I was like, I'm going to figure out how to be a pro surfer. So I started doing like all the pro-am events and trying to get other sponsors and yeah.
Who was financing that trip with Rusi, and where was he selling those photos?
It was in, I think it was when Surfing Magazine started doing like a quarterly women's like add-on. Do you remember that? It was like, it wasn't its own magazine. It was like
Yeah.
in Surfing Magazine. And I don't know if it was the first issue of that or the second issue, but it was in the very beginning of that. And so Surfing Magazine financed it. And then I think by then I had Rusty and Body Glove, I want to say, as sponsors. And so they like Jim basically made it happen. Like he was like, I'm gonna talk to Rusty, I'm gonna talk to and I yeah, it's hard to remember exactly beyond that.
Yeah. Um, I'm curious with all the pushback that you were getting with your mom, but then also the Bay Boys and every step along the way, so many other people would have just quit. Um, can you identify what it was within you that kind of triggered something that made you want to push forward?
Well, I was a stubborn little kid from day one, and I just loved it so much. But I think also, like, for me, surfing the ocean was the place that I felt like I could be myself. And even though I had all these other people saying I wasn't good enough or it wasn't for me, like, my experience of being in the water told me otherwise. And, I grew up in, like I said, a very upper middle class, like, financially comfortable environment, but there was a lot of trauma, a lot of like my mom was an alcoholic and definitely pretty abusive, and in all of the times of her saying like you're not good enough, like I felt like, okay, well, if I'm being rejected here, then I don't even have to strive to get your positive opinions because there's no way I'm going to get it anyways. And so therefore I'm just going to be me. And then when the boys in the water were also rejecting me, like there was nowhere else to be really. Like I didn't have a community, and like really like thankful to that one guy that sort of supported me and like gave me the ride and taught me about the tides and the swells and everything else. But once I was in the water, it was like none of that matters. I mean, I think all surfers feel that to some extent. Like you do that first duck dive and it's like everything is like left on the beach, and it just felt so good. And then when I did start winning contests, it was like that validation that I hadn't had anywhere else. And so that was really driving. And then also with like the modeling, which was so weird because like I said, I was a tomboy. I identified as a tomboy and I hated the modeling. But at the same time, it was a means to an end. And it was, in those early days, like because I was tall and thin and blonde and like from LA, it was like that was the recipe. I didn't even have to be that good of a surfer, but because I also kind of could say, oh, I won these NSSA contests, I had a lot more success than a lot of my peers in that era. And so I just realized like, okay, I can have success and validation. And if I do these things, people are going to think I'm cool, which I don't understand because I don't feel that way, but they keep telling me I am. So if they're believing it, then I'll keep doing those things that get me to those places.
I'm curious. It seems like there was a misunderstanding with that initial partnership with Rusty and what their expectations were of you. What were their expectations of you, and what were your expectations of them?
Yeah, the funny thing, so what had happened was when I was in high school, remember in like the magazines, like there would be like the address and it'd be like send a self-addressed stamped envelope and we'll send you some stickers. Remember that
Yeah.
era? And so my friends and I had done that to Rusty. And it was like these other two girls that were on the surf team with me. And I think it was the summertime and we were bored and we went next level and we like put together this little like notebook that was like some photos of us like at the beach, and maybe like one of their dads had taken some pictures of us surfing and our contest results. which, at the time, like I had won all of the high school contests. And so we sent it to Rusty and like hoped that maybe we'll get a t-shirt. And Rusty, I don't even remember exactly how it happened, if they called or they wrote back and they invited us to go down to the Irvine office. And for some reason, my friends were like on extended family trips. So I went to represent us and like think, oh, maybe they're going to give us some clothes. And when I went in there, they were like, here, put on these bathing suits. And I thought it was a little weird, but at the same time, I'm like this naive, 17-year-old girl. I was like, maybe they'll let me keep it. And I got paraded around the Rusty corporate offices in a bathing suit. I remember meeting PT, who was the marketing director at the time, and like everybody kind of looking me up and down and going, oh, cool. And they're like, hey, we're taking this trip in a few weeks to Cabo, and we want you to come with us. And I didn't ask any questions really, and I don't even know how I was able to be allowed to go, like how I convinced my mom to let me go. I don't even remember, but I remember it was like the first time I ever got drunk. It was this crazy experience, and I ended up as a model at this sales meeting, and Squid Row and the whole deal. And then after the trip, they offered to make me a surfboard. And so I met Rusty, and I was sponsored. And I think the early expectations were not very well described, or at least as I remember. I think I went to the North Shore for like a photo trip too. I can't remember if it was that year or a year later, but then I started, doing well. And, Janice Aragon kind of advocated for me a little bit. And yeah, I was like on the team. And yeah, then I met the Body Glove guys and got on that team. And yeah, just kind of grew from there.
So you don't remember, or do you remember any conversation about money? Like when they
No,
say we're going to Cabo in 2 weeks, do you want
I
to
did that.
come?
I didn't get paid. I know maybe they paid for my ticket because that would be the only way I would have been
Sure.
allowed to go. But nobody was paying me any money for sure.
It's crazy, right? Like whenever I'm trying to explain it to anybody outside of the surf world about like what pro surfers get paid or whatever, I'm like, they're doubling as a model, male and females, right? And so if you were a brand, any other brand, and you were going to hire somebody to do a photo shoot of your product and you're going to hire a known model, you're going to spend 10, 20, $30,000 a day to hire that person for their modeling. If you tell a pro surfer, I'll give you 80 grand a year and I own you all year long to get modeling, well, I have 300 shooting days, They're like, sweet, 80 grand, I'll take it. So
I mean, I
it's
would have done it just for the bathing suit. Like, give me the bathing suit.
right.
I'll do whatever I got to do.
Yeah, it's crazy in hindsight. So you said after that Puerto trip, you were going back to a lecture hall. Was that college already?
Yeah, yeah. Because I
So,
didn't start surfing until I was like a sophomore in high school. So yeah, it had only been a few years, and then now I'm at UCSD and trying to hustle through a psychology degree.
and what was your ambition with that? What did you want to do with your degree?
My dad was a lawyer, and he really, I think, wanted me to follow in his footsteps. And I was very stubborn, and I like to read, and I could be argumentative. And so I think part of me wondered if that was a potential path. I didn't know, but when I was trying to choose a degree, he was like, well, psychology, you could go pre-law with that. And so I just thought it was interesting.
Got it. Um, as you begin to travel with the sponsors, um, was there a viable opportunity to make a living not competing? Or what was your kind of career path at that point?
In those days, I don't think so. I mean, it was few and far between the women that were making a living at all. Like, I didn't know anybody that actually was. I mean, those girls that I met that were on that trip seemed to be, but it's not like I was asking them, so what do you get paid? Like, I just knew that I wanted to travel and surf, and it seemed like competition was the way, as long as you could also do the modeling on the side, because obviously I knew that it was the way that I looked. And also I could speak, so like when I would win the contest and then get the microphone and like do the acceptance speech or whatever, like I could tell the difference in the way that I did it versus other people. And then also, sponsors would tell me that too. Um, and I got it's hard to remember all the details. That was so long ago now, but at one point I got a manager who then was sort of grooming me and helping me. I think this was a couple of years later, maybe it was after I graduated college. um but yeah, up until that point, there was like the PSTA. It was like a pro-am tour in California, and for first place would get you $500. And I started doing those contests and winning quite a few of them, not all of them, but I won a lot. And and then if you won like the series and you got $1,000, and so I was able to. I was very lucky. My parents paid for my tuition and my room and board, but nothing more than that. And so I didn't get any extra spending money. And if I wanted a phone, I had to pay for it. So I was lucky that I started earning enough from contests to like pay for my, you know, activities, gas and phone and going out to dinner with friends or whatever. Um, and then I had a little bit of sponsorship. I was sponsored by Reef and Sector 9. And, I wasn't making big money with anybody at that point, but little bits here and there. And then I was like, okay, I got to get on tour as fast as possible. And so I started doing like QS events. I would do the US Open, and I went to France one year and did those contests. And I set the goal to graduate in 3 years. So I started taking on like extra units and doing summer school. And I was just like on the hustle. And I didn't surf blacks as much. I started surfing scripts because I could like get there quicker, and yeah, just like hardworking. And I didn't really party or socialize. I just like had this goal, like I'm going to be a pro surfer. And my parents thought I was a little bit crazy and like silly, like there's no money in that, whatever, but they couldn't really say no as long as I graduated. And so that was my goal. Like I'm just going to graduate, and I'm going to graduate as soon as possible, and then I can do whatever I want. And I was stoked because I graduated and I won the NSSA national title like the same month. And then I was able to negotiate some sponsorship deals that to allow me to have a travel budget to travel.
Um, it seems impossible. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine doing that without online courses. Like, if you have to
Right,
be
that's
present
insane.
for all of that and then compete and you're traveling to compete, that seems
Isn't that
you can't,
crazy? I know.
yeah.
Kids have it so easy these days, I swear. No, but I would like I always was a good student. School came easy to me, and I really loved to read and I like to write papers, and so it wasn't that hard. Like the math classes were a little harder, but all of the kind of like lit classes and psychology classes, I didn't find that challenging. And because like there was one, I can't remember where I went. I think I went to Tahiti with Jim Rusi again, and it was going to conflict with finals. And so I went to all my professors and was like, hey, I'm going to miss finals week. Like, can I take the final early, or can we work something out? And in one of my classes, the professor looked at like the two midterms we'd had, and I'd gotten A's on both of them. And I just didn't even have to take the final. Like it was going to be too much work for him to like prepare the test early. He's like, well, you've gotten A's already. I assume you're going to get an A on the final. Like, don't worry about it. My friends were so
Wow.
jealous. They're like, oh, wait, you're going to Tahiti and you're not taking the final? Like,
That's amazing. So, did you ultimately qualify for the tour?
I never made the CT. No. Back in those days, I don't know. I mean, it's still incredibly hard. But I was competing against girls who'd been surfing their whole lives and weren't trying to juggle college with it. And I think that if I'd had more time, maybe, like if I had a few more years to develop my surfing, it could have been the difference. Cause I a lot of times I felt like definitely I was never going to be world champ, but like with the people who are sort of on the lower end of the tour, like I didn't feel like my ability level was so different. But I just had a hard time like really putting it together in the heats consistently. Like I would have a good result. Like I had one year where I had made like a ton of quarterfinals and in some like bigger contests. So I was like right there, but just never quite enough to get over the hump. And I had a hard time kind of fitting in on tour. Like I felt like always felt like an outsider, and maybe that was like part of my like early childhood of feeling like an outsider, and then it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. But yeah, I came into it like as such a nerd, and like I was like reading my book, and like the other girls were giving me shit like, come on, we're going out, because this again was the early days of, there was no money in it, and there was nobody was traveling with their coach and their trainer and like their meditation. It was like we were all crashing in one tiny place and sleeping on the floor, and like 8 people piled into a sedan rental car. And um yeah, it was a different era. And
Well,
so like the first couple of years I was like trying really hard to be serious, and then I was like, ah, screw it, I'm just gonna smoke weed and drink beer and party with the rest of them, because that's more fun anyway.
well, in my estimation, the way those who qualify for tour, you either have to be unbelievably cutthroat or just have like this preternatural talent like John, where, he wasn't necessarily a cutthroat competitor until the last couple of years, but he got on tour just with that talent alone. And so it seems difficult to be that cutthroat if you develop all the camaraderie that you're talking about. When you're traveling together to save money and then you're all piling in a car together, then you turn and go to a heat, it's hard to be cutthroat at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I had moments of feeling like I was that way, but I don't know, this is mess with your head too. It's like once you start like trying to beat the other person by being cutthroat, then I feel like it's hard to focus on your surfing. I don't know. I just didn't have
Yeah.
the I think it was a combination of like not having the like real mindset for it. Like I would like make the quarterfinals, and then I would like think too much about it, and then I would like show up to the semis and not be able to surf, because
Yeah.
I'd wilted up in my head, or I'd go left instead of right, or do something stupid. Like the best I ever did was times where like in Europe where the tide swing is so gnarly, and you'd be surfing at low tide and you couldn't even hear the announcer. Like I feel like I would do best in those environments when I wasn't thinking about it and I was just surfing. And if I knew I needed like a 4.5, then I would like spaz out and like try to do too big a turn and fall. So I don't know. It was fun, and I had some incredible experiences traveling the world, but ultimately the competition thing was not for me.
How did the opportunity for the boarding house present itself?
You know what happened? I was on a boat trip to the Mentawais, and it was at the same time as that OP. An OP did that like boat trip contest with like Bruce Irons and Sunny and all those people. And I was surfing at out there, and there was one day where like our group was there at the same time as all those guys, and I met Sunny in the water, and he just like said hi to me, and I knew who he was. I was like, oh, hi. And he asked me my name, and we had like a little conversation, and that was it. But apparently then, because he was instrumental in bringing the group together, it was like him and Boost Mobile. He was sponsored by Boost Mobile,
Hmm.
and whoever that marketing director was, I don't remember, was the one that like pitched the show. And so when it came to selecting the cast members, Sunny recommended me, and I
That's
got
amazing.
it really was. And I got the gig, and that was huge. That was huge for me.
I watched that show when it aired. It was like on the WB when I was in high school. And
No way.
yeah, it was crazy because my access to surfing was really limited to surf magazines and videos, but the videos are probably 18 months old by the time you watch them, even the contest videos that they would put out. So this felt like kind of, I mean, it was reality TV, I guess is what it was. It was a real peek behind the curtain of what was going on in the mythical North Shore. So what was the proposition for you? And obviously there's probably a paycheck involved, so that helps. And what was the experience like, most importantly?
Yeah, I had no idea what to expect going into it because, like you said, this is the early days of reality TV. This is not like now where you know what reality TV is. So when they said that, I had graduated college already, so I think it was maybe like a year out of college. So I
I think
had been going.
I think you
Go
were
ahead.
22 at the time, if I'm not
I think
mistaken.
I think that's right. And I
Yeah.
graduated. I graduated early. I graduated before I was 21. So yeah, I think it was like a year later. And I had experience with spending time on the North Shore because Body Glove used to rent a house every year. And I would go as long as I could with my like school schedule. And then once I graduated, then I would go for like the full 2 months. Remember back in the glory days where all the brands had houses on the North Shore and the whole team would go and it was like the big migration. I don't think that happens anymore, but it was so fun. And so I was like, okay, cool. Like, I'm going to go do that. And I'm going to have my own room in this killer house and they're going to film us. Like, amazing. Like, I really didn't think much more than that. Like, I had no idea what it was going to be until I signed up to do it. I think they made 17 grand. And it was like 7 weeks of filming. And um I was sponsored by OP at the time, and so they were stoked. And yeah, I was just like, oh, this is going to be good exposure. I'm going to be on a TV show, but I really did not. I think, and also being 22, you just like your mind is so much more naive. Like I just had no idea. And then yeah, getting there, it was pretty incredible. And we wore a microphone, 24/7 basically, except when we were sleeping, we would turn it in before we went to bed for 7 weeks. They filmed everything, but it was really fun. It became this game because there were seven of us. It was me, Sunny, Veronica Kay, Danny Fuller, Damian Hobgood, Chelsea Georgeson at the time, and Miles Padaka. So there were seven of us, but there was only four cameras. And so they didn't tell us how it worked. And like it became this like game to me to try and like figure it out because there's always someone listening to you. But until you started talking about something interesting and like the potential plot line, the camera might be like over here filming somebody else, but as soon as like I'm on the phone with like a friend telling, oh my god, what happened this morning, or having a conversation, then the camera would show up. So over the course of the weeks you kind of start to figure out what was happening and how to tell the story in a way that you feel like they're not going to be able to use. Because the one thing I was very conscious of was the fact that my sisters were going to see it, because I was the oldest of five, and in our family, like for all the things that we went through when we were young, I was kind of the caretaker of them. Like my mom wasn't really always super present, and so I was really looking after my younger sisters a lot of the time, and at least as far as like emotionally. And so I was very, very conscious of wanting to be a good role model for them. And I was no longer a Christian, I'd partied and all that, but still, like, I think I still had that idea that like it's really important to me that when they see me on TV, that I'm proud of the way that I come across. And I liked, and in the end I felt like I did a good job of that. And so yeah, and then also because it was network TV, like they couldn't show anything illegal. So they couldn't show you drinking. So you'd have to like put the beer in a cup. You couldn't like have the beer, and they couldn't show you smoking weed. So if you were downstairs in Danny Fuller's like basement smoking weed, then you had to like, and were holding the bong, then you knew that they couldn't use that footage. So there was ways to kind of like go, I can say whatever I want to say right now because I'm holding a bong and I know you can't use this footage.
Yeah.
So it was fun, but of course, ultimately it's reality TV and they're going to edit it in certain ways. And while for the most part I liked the way it came across, there was like a rivalry that they created with Veronica Kay and I that was kind of a bummer. Like I think just to try and make it more interesting, they like set us as like I was the yoga girl and she was like the party girl, and like we did have conflicts, and that is our personalities. But of course, like I also party and she also does yoga, so it wasn't as extreme as they made it out to be. And that was the only bummer, was afterwards I felt like she like she and I and like all the Roxy people that were associated with her were kind of bummed, and because they believed what they saw on the
Uh,
show. But for me personally, my career, it was amazing because my contract was up right as that show came out. So it was like the peak of my, popularity, my 15 minutes of fame perfectly coincided with the last contract that I was able to ride out my career with. So yeah, it couldn't have worked out any better as far as that goes.
do you know if it's available to stream anywhere?
It's on YouTube. Yeah.
Oh, it
All
is.
six.
Okay.
There were 6 episodes. It's been a minute since I looked for it, but at one point somebody was asking me about it and I looked it up and I found it on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah, I don't remember any of the plot lines at all. I remember there was a couple salacious moments where like Sonny Garcia punched somebody, and then I went to school the next day and everybody's talking about it, you know.
Totally. Yeah. It was, and there were plenty of salacious moments not caught on film. Poor Sonny, but yeah.
I want to see the cutting room floor footage.
Yeah.
Um, I think we all kind of understand the systemic sexism that existed in that era more so than it does now, probably. But were there any kind of overt violations that you would want to share or talk about or shed light on that you experienced?
Yeah, I wonder how much of it still goes on. I mean, starting from my very first experience was I got paraded around, the rusty office in my bathing suit with all of the, decision makers going, "Oh, okay, yeah, we'll put her on the team." That was always a factor, and there were certainly marketing directors that I felt like, and in order to, it wasn't at all about how I surfed. It was just about how I looked. And I was smart enough to recognize that and know that I sort of had to play that part up, and had been in uncomfortable situations where I was, in a private place with this guy that I felt like I had, and in a lot of cases, it's funny because I was actually just telling some stories recently, but like in a lot of cases, it wasn't that it was totally non-consensual. Like there was never a time where it was like not at all consensual. But there were definitely places where I felt like I had to give a certain level of affection and attention to somebody that the only reason I was doing that was because they were in a position of power, whether they were at a magazine or a brand. And, certainly like there were really gross ones that I would never have done that with. But like there were the ones that were like much older than me. Like I was like 17, 18, 19, 20 years old. And these were men in their like late 30s, and they were definitely using their positions of power to offer me to hook up with them. And in some cases I did. And again, it wasn't ever like it was like rape or assault. Never. Never was that the case, luckily. But certainly coercion, and when I look back on those times, like some of those things like really benefited me, especially in the early days. Like eventually, once I was a little older and a little more mature and like had more success, then I didn't feel like it was as necessary. But there were a few people in the very early days that yeah, if I could go back in time and tell myself like, hey, like maybe you don't put yourself in that position, they're just using you, but at the same time I benefited from it too. So it's kind of weird to think about.
Yeah. Well, in that gray area, I guess, if it's not an overt violation of you saying no, then there is no recourse after the fact if you did, feel differently about it down the road. But how do you feel like you personally responded as you've had these kind of realizations after the fact? How did you respond personally?
I mean, it's fine. Like I don't feel like, I mean, there was a couple times where there was one time in Hawaii where I got really drunk, and there was a rep that was staying at the house that if I hadn't like thrown up all over him, maybe something would have happened and I would have that would have been a different situation. But like all of these other things, it's like I just chalk it up to it's a bummer that the industry is that way. You know, it's a bummer that these men in position of power have this opportunity to take advantage of young girls who obviously, you know, have something to gain by showing them extra attention, you know. And I know that that happens in all industries, in the film industry, in the entertainment, in modeling. Like I know it happens. um and it's lame. It's
Yeah.
basically all there is to it. Like it's lame that that's the way it is, and that's where I wish that there had been more females in positions of power, and that wouldn't have happened because I know now that is the case. Like there are a lot more women in the surf industry in marketing roles or, you know, director roles, and that wouldn't have never happened, and it would have been more about just like your ability. And yes, sex sells, so obviously when you're talking about, you know, modeling, then yes, looks are going to matter, the way that you present yourself and all the other things. I mean, now you can just look at how many likes you get on Instagram, and that is something you can show, you know, as like, this is why I'm valuable because look at all this content I'm creating. But in those days, like, you use what you had, and in my case, like I used what I had, and it did benefit me. But yeah, it's a little creepy. It's a little creepy
Yeah.
to think about it, especially when I was in my late 30s, you know, and then imagining that I was in a position to like hook up with like a 18-year-old boy, and like how creepy that would be, and like how gross I would feel. And then it makes me think about those guys. I mean, now like I'm 44 years old and I've done a counseling degree and I've forgiven myself and them, and I don't have any animosity. You know, I have understanding of the whole situation. Like I get why it happened and both people's part in that. But it's more just like it's creepy, and I hope that's not still happening.
You speak with it, you speak about it with such clarity. And so my question about kind of like how did you respond to it? I was just curious if you have that much clarity in the moment and then all or what methods allowed you to find that clarity. You know what I mean? Like for anybody else who's going through something similar, because that gray area that you're discussing, I don't hear discussed often enough. I hear the story about victimization a lot, you know, but the story of there's a certain amount of, compliance on my part and a certain amount of reticence, but I couldn't process that in real time. And so, whatever, when you the week down the road or the month down the road when you're reflecting back on that and feeling like you're going to pick your own path of empowerment out of it as opposed to try to seek retribution or whatever it is, that's the story that I'm kind of curious about. So I don't know how much of that was in real time versus therapy down the road or whatever.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't in real time. It is interesting point that you speak about because I could tell the story differently. Like I could place blame and point fingers and say, no, he got me drunk and he gave me mushrooms, and you know that's why this happened and he's bad. And you know, like there is some element of that in like maturity level that like is maybe more his responsibility, but ultimately like I made those decisions to put myself in that place, and I'm gonna put blame where it's due, and that's like me too. And it definitely wasn't something like you know, there were many different situations and different ones and different people, you know, I feel differently about. But it's certainly in hindsight, I feel the way I feel about it now. Like in the times that it was happening and maybe just afterwards, like you know, I remember like it was so wrapped up into the whole culture at the time too, because when I graduated college and all of a sudden I had so much time on my hands because I'd been hustling to graduate early and, you know, going to lecture hall and balancing surf and competition. And I had a boyfriend that lived 2 hours away, and like I was so busy. And then all of a sudden I graduated and I had so much time on my hands. And at that time, Rochelle Ballard and Lane Beachley and like 𝐏𝐚𝐿 and all those girls, Serena, they had formed a women's union because this was still in the era where the women were just getting the shit out of conditions and no pay. And like, it was like the talent was starting to grow and the industry was starting to grow, but they still weren't treating the women very well at all. And so those women had banded together and decided we need to create a union. And I learned about it and was like, I want to help. Like I have energy and time and education, and you guys are trying to win world titles, and like I have time, like let me help. And so they were stoked and they voted me in as president immediately. And that was like pretty shocking, but I was like, okay, sweet. I'm going to run with this. And so I was actually the rep of the women's rep on the ASP board for a minute, where I was going to those meetings, and Rabbit was the president. And I was like so earnest and eager and like trying to advocate for the women and do my part, and all of this, but I didn't have like the bitterness and the kind of like aggression maybe that some of those other girls had. Like I was sort of an outsider but also in it, and so I felt like I was coming from this place where I could communicate better. And I remember I was in J Bay walking with Rabbit, having come out of this meeting, and I was talking to him about something, I don't remember what, and I felt like he wasn't really listening to me. And he was like absentmindedly like flipping through a magazine as we were talking. And I was like advocating for whatever it was I was advocating for. And he stopped on this photo. It was an ad for Paul Mitchell. And it was this like girl with like blonde curly hair and all this makeup with this like smile with her surfboard. And he's like, you know what we need more of in the women's industry? We need this. And I was like, that's me. And he looks at it, he's like, oh, okay. And to me, like that summed up the experience. It was like they're not going to pay attention to you, even when you're standing there right next to them, showing respect and having this conversation and having like thought and all the stuff behind it. All he cares about is the curly blonde hair with the makeup in the magazine, even though that was me. It was so funny. And so I felt like the whole era was that. And I got to the point where I was like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm over it. I'm over trying so hard to fit into this mold of, winning contests and being sexy and sucking up to these men who are the positions of power and being smart and trying to like do the right thing and all this stuff. Like, I'm over it. I'm over it. And I ran away to Central America, and I bought a piece of land and I built a tiny little house that was off the grid, and I spent time surfing. And it was through that time that I finally like felt like I could be myself and could get perspective on all of that stuff that happened before. Like once I took the mask off and put it down, then I could decide like who I wanted to be and who I was, and then get perspective on everything I had been through before.
That is such an amazing story, the rabbit story.
Right.
um, you did a really beautiful job of segueing us into moving abroad. So I want to go deeper into that a little bit. The motivations are clear, especially as you explained it, but how difficult was that decision to actually do?
It wasn't difficult at all.
Really?
Yeah, not at all. I for a long time I really like hated my family. I've come back around to time, and having my own kids has changed my perspective. But yeah, I got to the point where I was just over my family, like did not need to see them. And then I was really over the surf industry too. And yeah, just like I said before, like just tired of wearing the mask. And my boyfriend at the time that I had throughout my 20s, he was a good surfer, but like totally outside the surf industry, like did not like the surf industry at all, and would give me so much shit anytime I had to be Holly Beck, in quotes. And so whenever I had free time and he had free time, we would go on surf trips to like off the beaten path places. And he really liked getting barreled, and is a good surfer. And so we would go to Pasquale's, like with back in the day, like people weren't really going to Pasquale's, or like not many anyways. And then we went to Nicaragua, and we just both like fell in love with Nicaragua. And he bought some land, and then I bought some land, and then I was like, this is where I want to live. And the beach that we went to at the time was just like my dream wave. It's still my favorite wave in the world. It's like a hollow shore break It breaks really close to the sand and it's super hollow, and you can get barreled every single day. And it's beautiful and it's remote and it's really affordable. And at the time when we first went there, there was nobody in the water. Like the first week we spent there, he and I surfed completely by ourselves. Like he was getting barreled going right, I was getting barreled going to left for like hours, like just us in the water. And I was like, this is where I want to be. Like I want to be here. And I talked to the guy that owned the camp. The camp was just getting built. That's why no one was there yet. And he was too busy in construction to serve himself really. And he had a little piece of land for sale, and I bought it. And I was like, I want to live here. And the boyfriend was like, well, if I work one more year, I can save up like this much more money. He was an engineer for a helicopter company, had a good job, and was reluctant to leave it. And I had recently gotten an MBA. So my last couple of years on tour, I had a mentor who had suggested I get an MBA, and she had done that, and she was the marketing director for Patty, the dive company.
Mhm.
And she was like, if I were you, I'd get the MBA. And then when you retire from pro surfing, you can move straight into the marketing department. You don't have to start out as like a team manager, like a sales rep or something. And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. And I had imagined that I was going to work in the surf industry. That was my sort of my plan. And I was like, great. I don't want to start out as a team manager. I'm going to do that. And so I got the MBA, and I even had a couple job offers, like the Body Glove, the wetsuit license had offered me a job working under their marketing director. And then that woman who had mentored me had offered me a job working under her at Patty, but both of them were office jobs. They're going to require me to go drive and sit in a cubicle and maybe go to a couple trade shows, maybe a photo shoot a year. But like to go from what my life had been straight into that seemed not palatable. And then I had bought this land in Nicaragua, and I during the course of the MBA I had written all these business plans, of course, and one of them had been for a surf school in Nicaragua. And again, like putting it in context, back in I stopped competing in 2008. And so back then there weren't women's surf schools all over the place like there are now. Like there was only two that I knew of. And so I was like, oh, this could be cool. Like maybe I'll do that. And the boyfriend kind of delayed a couple of years. And so I did some like photo shoots, like lifestyle surf travel. I kept the sponsorship going because I was like going and producing trips, and they were going on Surfline, and because by then there weren't that many women's mags, or they weren't paying, but there was Surfline, and Fuel TV, and I was doing that. And yeah, just the further I got like out of the surf industry, the more I wanted to keep going in that direction. And so we built this like little 400 square foot house, and I went and spent a month there, and it was like off the grid completely. We had a solar panel on top that just like did the lights and the fan, and I had a cooler where I would just buy ice for. And then I had a well I thought it was so cool because you actually had to like pump it by hand and then carry the 5 gallon bucket, like 50 yards down to the house. And I got so strong. And like I was so conscious of like every drop of water because like I had to like lift it 40 feet, and then carry it in a 5 gallon bucket. And I was just like barefoot and like dirty, and because you can't use that much water to shower because it's just a pain. And I was the happiest I'd ever been. I was so happy, like just getting world-class waves, like barrels with no one around, and then like just coming home with my dog and like pumping my water. And I was so happy. And I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, I want to live this. And at the time it was like for a year, I'm going to live this for a year, and then I'll go back and like do the things, and the more time I spent, the more I wanted to keep doing that. And um, I had kind of I was like trying to be like a mentor for women surfers because like the women surfing was growing, and I was well known in my community. And like I remember I went to like a Huntington Beach women's surf club event where I just thought it would be cool to like encourage the other women. And So the president had invited me to go to this event and I went and I was like kind of talking about, oh yeah, I'm kind of thinking about like maybe doing like a women's surf camp. Like, I don't know, but I have this business plan. And the president was like, do it. We'll bring a group. I was like, yeah, maybe, maybe. And she's like, no, for sure. Like, I'll bring a group. And I was like, really? Like, okay, cool. It was great because I was still getting paid to surf and it wasn't a ton of money, but I had like no expenses. So, at this point I was probably getting like, I don't know, like 2,500 bucks a month or something. And so that was like more than enough to live on in Nicaragua. So I had no pressure to like really immediately get the business up and running, which was great. I hosted a few groups. And then I feel like in my life in surfing, it was a lot of like being in the right place at the right time, having luck go my way, and then having the like work ethic and intelligence to like run with it when the opportunity presented itself. And so many of like the different pieces of my story were all that. It was like I was the right age with the right look in LA right when women's surfing exploded after Blue Crush. And then, I got Sunny Garcia saw me and like wanted me to be on that TV show. And then I showed up and I did the audition and I got the part and I ran with it. And like with the women's union too, it was like I was just out of college and I had the skills and and everything. And then starting my business, it was the same way. It was like I moved to Nicaragua and then House Hunters International did an episode on me and they wanted to do it with my boyfriend and I. And that show is it's like reality TV show. It's completely fake. And he didn't want to do it. But I was still in the like pro surfer mindset of like, oh, but it'll be good for my sponsors if I'm on this TV show. And so I convinced the producers to have the show be about me. And I got my friend, 𝐏𝐚𝐿, who I had been competing with, to come down and pose as my business partner and make it be the House Hunters International show is us looking for a house where we're going to do our women's surf camp. And so they filmed it. And the very first year of my business, 90% of the clients came because they had seen that show. And
Wow.
so it just like it, and because I had no pressure because I was still getting paid to surf for another couple years, I didn't have any stress. And so it kind of just like things just sort of, not that I didn't work hard and like when the clients come down, show them an awesome time. And, there was some work involved, but it also felt like really lucky too. I got a lucky break.
Wow. I'm really curious about that business. How many retreats do you do a year now, and how many employees do you have?
Well, it's grown a lot. So it started out just me kind of doing everything and only
Right.
in Nicaragua. And then a couple of years later, I started in 2010. And then a couple of years later, I met my current business partner. She was just a surf instructor, but I saw a kindred spirit in her. And I wanted to keep her. And so I invited her on as a partner after a little bit. And now, this will be our 15th year. And we do about 90 retreats a year, like all over the place. And now I'm not personally at a lot of the retreats. I just do like a few specialty retreats a year and just kind of manage the back end. But we have like 40 surf instructors that are like all over the place. And then we have like shorter contracts, people come in for like a month or whatever. But yeah, and we have like a really strong like social responsibility component. So I know the surf camp business um can be hard on local communities, and it is what it is. We're like bringing surfers to crowd waves, but we try to do it as ethically as possible, and also hire locals and give back to nonprofit organizations wherever we are. And yeah, we try to do it as small a footprint as we can. But has become a pretty big operation, which is
It's
awesome.
yeah, it's incredible. I'm always fascinated at how people scale a business. It seems like in those first kind of years, were you just going and using an internet cafe to like communicate with the outside world?
Dude, it was gnarly. There wasn't even cell service. There were no internet cafes in northern Nicaragua. I had to drive. I lived from when I very soon after living in that little 400 square foot place, I was probably there for like 2 years. And then when I decided to live there full time and that boyfriend didn't want to, we broke up. And then I moved to join this commune, basically. It was like a eco lodge where they were just getting going. And so it was really symbiotic that they had the lodge and I had the clients. And I like just joined. I was living in a thatched roof cabana with a composting toilet, and I had a cell signal booster. So I was able to get like a little bit of service with like one of those little like modems that you like stick into your computer. But once a week, I would drive an hour to town and post up at this like Chinese food restaurant in Nicaragua. It was so random because they had good Wi-Fi and air conditioning. And I would just eat tacos chinos, which was what they called the egg rolls, and like just work for a few hours. Yeah, it was heavy. It's heavy to think about how like so much of the story from the online school to like remote business operation is so much easier now.
Totally. Yeah. So, and 15 years is not a long period of time to be able to grow it to 90 retreats.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's been good. The first years I'd really capitalized off of being Holly Beck because I still had like a name in surfing and and that TV show, but like now it's really just primarily like word of mouth, and we have an awesome team, and we have a great like social media director that started out as a surf instructor, and it's all grown really organically. Like I never
Okay.
paid ad, or we never did Google ads. It's just really been like organic growth and like a great product and word of mouth and just little by little.
What is holistic surf coaching?
Right. So holistic surf coaching. So I feel like I've noticed in my life that like every 10 years of doing something, I get kind of burnt out and need like a new mental challenge. So it was like from spending like about 10 years like as like a pro surfer and competing. And then I did the MBA, and then that launched, life in Central America and my business. And then I had 10 years in, I had got married and had kids. So that was obviously very like time and energy consuming for a while. But then I started kind of feeling that again, like this like stagnant feeling, like I feel like my brain, like this is the business was like not on autopilot so much, but like it was, I had it figured out and it was like running and I had a good team and it was going. And I felt like it just brain stimulation was lacking. And I wasn't super happy in my relationship, and having two small kids, and it was definitely like a little bit of something missing. But I had this friend who used to work for me who had told me that she was going back to school. She was a yoga teacher and she was going back to school to get a master's of counseling degree. And it was kind of almost like that mentor that I'd had that encouraged me to get the MBA. Like her saying that like sparked something in me. I was like, oh, interesting. Like I have the psychology undergrad and I've been through a lot in my life. And like, there's a lot of mental health stuff in my family and addiction issues in my family. Like, that's really interesting. I would like to do that one day. But I had a baby still, and the time wasn't right. And then in 2019, my marriage, um, just what's the right word for that? My marriage fell apart. And I was like really looking, I'd done like couples counseling with him, like trying to figure it out. And that was really the first time I'd done therapy. And I was like really interested in how awesome that was. And then I had a sister pass away. Her and her husband died of a fentanyl overdose. And this was like in the early days of fentanyl. Like I'd never even heard of fentanyl when it happened. And she left behind a couple of kids, and my mom had been an alcoholic, and my sister had struggled with drugs for a long time. And it was like all of a sudden like my own stuff with like my divorce and trying to be a mom and a single mom, and then my family, it was like mental health was just like right in my face. And I started thinking like, oh, it would be really cool to study that. Like I need my own therapy and I want to study it. And then, so that was in the fall of 2019. And then obviously we all know what happened in the spring of 2020. And so the borders were closed and nobody could travel internationally. And I suddenly had time. And I was lucky, I was living in Pavones, and I owned my house, and the cost of living down there is really cheap if you're only paying like power and internet and food. And so it was like, as much as it was stressful to like not be able to work, I had money saved, and um, it was like the impetus to like, okay, I don't know what else to do, and I'm gonna get another master's, and I'm gonna study mental health. And my ex, the kid's dad, started putting pressure on me to move back to California because that's what he had done after we split up. And then once my sister died and left my nieces without parents, I started feeling like this family pull that I was going to have to move back to California. Like at that point, it felt like I was just in Central America for selfish reasons. Like obviously, I want to surf, I want to be in warm water, but like my business is on hold. I don't even know what's going to happen to it. Like who knows how long COVID's going to last. Maybe I'm going to have to move back to California. What am I going to do? Like I'm going to need to reinvent myself, my third career. And so all of those things together like conspired to inspire me to get the Masters of Counseling. And so I started that in May of 2020, and it took me a couple of years to do it. And wow, it was so life-changing. It
Mm.
was so incredible, like the learning that I did about myself and my communication patterns and coping mechanisms and how I was showing up as a friend and as a partner, as a parent, as a sister. Like I learned so much about myself and everybody around me. I felt like the biggest thing I got was like compassion for myself and everyone around me, and a different way of looking at humans, and the way that the things that we go through like impact our choices and the way that we show up. And when I had been running the business, I had started noticing that the way people acted in the water was related to their story. So like I would, in a retreat setting, you're really getting to know these people. You're spending time with them in the water, pushing them into waves, noticing if they're fearful or if they don't care at all about other surfers, if they're selfish or if they're always putting everybody else first. Oh no, it's not my turn. It's not my turn, and then hearing about their relationship or about their job or about their family and noticing the parallels. And so I had already kind of like been forming my own like theories around those connections. But then in going through, counseling, I it was like, oh, okay, like this is real. Like these parallels that I'm seeing are real. And I moved back to California to complete like my internship to get the degree in 2021, and thinking I was going to be there for maybe like 3 to 5 or more years, where I wanted to get, because there's no school. I feel like this is such a convoluted story, but the other thing is where I was living in Pavones, there's no school. And my kids were, what were they when we moved away? They were like 5 and 7, 4 and 6 in that time frame. And they were getting into that like school age. And I had thought that I was going to homeschool them. But oh my God, to be a single parent and run a business and try to go surfing and homeschool your kids is just, I'm pretty capable and I'm a hard worker, but that was even beyond what I was capable of. And so, yeah, we moved back to California, and I was like, well, maybe as long as I'm going to get them to the point where they can read and write and be old enough to do like online school. And then maybe we'll move back. And in the meantime, maybe I'll be a therapist, or I'll be a surf therapist, or I'll teach surf lessons, or I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll figure it out. Um, and so luckily, after a couple years, people started traveling again, and my ex decided that he actually wanted to spend more time back in Central America, and he had suggested, let's move back to Costa Rica, but we're going to move to a different area where there's better schools and more for the kids. And I was like, oh, thank God. Because a few years in California was all I could really stomach after the life I had been living. But once I had opened my eyes to surf therapy, there's no going back. And so now I have integrated it into the retreats, and that is what holistic surf coaching is.
What does that look like? What does it look like integrated? Is there then an talk therapy session after the surf session?
Well, it's kind of annoying because I feel like the whole holistic word gets thrown around a ton. And when I look at, we're about to redo our website for Surf with Amigas, and I'm like looking at other businesses' websites, and it's irritating how many of them call holistic surf coaching as what they're doing. Because my conception of holistic surf coaching is that the coaching isn't just like put more weight on your front foot and look down the line and bend your knees more and like, you know, all of the like coaching aspects that we're generally doing, but it's also looking at what's going on internally, like emotion wise. So if somebody like paddles for a wave and pulls out, there's a lot of reasons why they might have pulled out. They might have pulled out because they saw a surfer way far down the line. And even that surfer, though that surfer was way too deep, in their mind, they're like, oh, it's their wave and not mine. Right. And so it could be that it was the fear of the takeoff because the first time they went surfing, they nose dove and they flipped over and the board hit them in the leg and they had to get 10 stitches, you know? Or it could be because there's people paddling out and their worst fear is hurting someone because earlier in their surfing career they hurt somebody and it's just like in their head. So holistic surf coaching for me is number one, trying to help them be better surfers by working also on their mindset. And part of that is like, as if in therapy, figuring out like, where did those early thoughts come from? Like, are you thinking that that other surfer on the wave has more rights to it to you because in your family you were minimized and everybody else in the family's emotions were more important than yours, or you had a parent that was an alcoholic and it was all about them? So it's like going back to like find those links, and then we can practice it in surfing because it's probably showing up in other parts of their life too. It's probably in their relationship, but in therapy, like that's a lot to take on. But in surfing, it feels like a more, call it frivolous, not that surfing is frivolous, but you know, it's not like as important as your relationship with your partner to most of us, right? If you're not a professional surfer, it's easier to practice speaking up for yourself or taking up space in the water. And if you can develop those skills and that confidence, then you can take that outside of the water and it can improve your relationship. And the same goes for when you're talking about fear or anxiety or yeah, speaking up for yourself. I work with a lot of women primarily, not just women, but primarily women. So it's common that speaking up for yourself, taking up space is a big issue. And that's the water is a great place to practice that. And it can be like for some people who have experience with therapy and they feel very comfortable about saying, oh yeah, I have issues because in my past, and I talk about this with my therapist on land. So now we're just bringing it into the water. But for somebody that's like intimidated by therapy, or there's still that stigma of like, oh, well, I don't need therapy. It can be like a softer version of it. So I feel like it can be like the gateway to realizing the benefit of talking about your emotions. And it can just help you in the water. If you can have the confidence, even if you don't take it out of the water, if you can have the confidence to like find the empowerment to paddle to the peak, then you're going to be getting better waves. So it's a
Yeah.
good thing.
So I understand there's people looking for therapy and I understand there's people looking for surf retreats. How do you find clients looking for surf retreat therapy?
It has been a dance of trying to decide how to market it. In the beginning, I called it surf therapy retreat. And then I feel like people were like either turned off by it because they're like, oh, I just have the normal anxiety and depression. I don't need that kind of therapy. Or we were getting people that were like really still in a crisis situation, like had just gotten out of an abusive relationship and were just like way a lot needed more support than the retreat was designed to give. So I've been calling it holistic surf coaching. But like I said, when I compare what we're doing with holistic surf coaching with what other people, I think other people are doing holistic surf coaching because they're going to do a sound bath and like an ice bath and they're calling it holistic surf coaching. Not that sound baths and ice baths aren't also super supportive and awesome, but it's not what I'm doing. So it's still a work in process on exactly the marketing aspect, but I only do a few a year and we've been filling them. So as we go, we kind of like dial it in a little bit more. And I think more than anything, it's great because the people that sign up for that are the ones that are going to be a little bit more comfortable with talking about their feelings. So I think it's easier with women than it is with men. Like I think the same thing is needed with men to like normalize like fear and cheering for each other instead of like
Yeah.
putting each other down and like talking shit like boys do, like I've seen, you know. But at least women in general, like generalizing about the genders here, women seem already a little bit easier and more comfortable talking about their feelings. But I think that the start is to really get the program dialed for women, and then to start encroaching into the men's space. Because if we want to change surfing culture, got to get the men talking about their feelings too. Because I know you have
So
them.
So, surfing with Amiga is not all retreats incorporate this holistic approach that you're talking about, but some of them do, and those are
That's right.
identifiable.
That's
Got
right.
it. Okay. Um, I'm just curious if you have being away from California now for an extended period of time, what seems most absurd about the American way of life to you now?
The consumerism is the worst thing. Like the I know because we just spent a couple years in California, and my kids who grew up in the jungle, and if we were going to a birthday party, you would go find like a really cool rock and like paint it, or you would like give we would go to the store and get like a basket of fun snacks, and like that would be the gift. And then we went to the US and like started going to birthday parties, and it's like you have to go to Target and spend $30, and and you buy some like crappy plastic toy that they're going to open up and then forget about. And then now my kids are back in Central America, and they were corrupted after just a couple of years. And I feel like that applies to everything else too. It's like here, they're like Apple store is really far away. So you make your phone last as long as possible. And granted, I work on my phone, and so I need to have a nice phone, but I see like the tendency to like upgrade to the newest phone like immediately. And I know when I go back to California and I go out, like I feel like my wardrobe is not up to par. But when I go out with my friends down here, it's like if there's a hole in your shirt, or you kind of smell like mold, or like there's stains, it's like it's all good. And because that's not the important thing. And I know that there are communities in the US that are like that too. It's not everybody that feels that way, but in general, that's the biggest difference I see.
There's a documentary that just came out on Netflix a week or two ago. It's called Buy Now. Have you seen this? Um, it's interviewing like CEOs and kind of key people in giant companies and corporations from Amazon down, where they're detailing how much it is a part of the company and corporation's blueprint to keep you on this cycle of consumerism and making, planned obsolescence into the product. And then if they make too much product and the market doesn't buy it, they just dispose of all that product so as not to flood the market with it so they can keep pricing high. But the sophistication at which they're operating, from the color of the buttons on the website to all of the user experience, it feels diabolical. It's not a coincidence, or it's not just through evolution that we're at this point of consumerism. It was a designed plan from the most powerful corporations in the world, with the best scientists and graphic designers and marketing teams all working to get us on this system of just needing to hit the feeder constantly. It's crazy.
Yeah, and you get sucked in so easily. And even in the surfing, with like the new model of surfboards, and like I get it, you got to sell a lot of boards to make any money. Like I totally understand. And it's fun to get a new board and be like, "Ooh, this new model, they tweaked it just a little bit, and I want to see how it goes." The my last relationship, he lived in San Diego, and I was like amazed because I'd been so out of that for so long. And in the couple of years I was in California, and like just the fixation on, oh, CI came out with a new model and I got to get it, and then ride it for like a year and then sell it on OfferUp and then get the new model. And it was so interesting to like be a part of that and realize, and again, I know not everybody is that way, but it seems like the system is set up to encourage that kind of behavior.
It's crazy. I'm curious, kind of in closing questions, what surf media do you follow nowadays? Or maybe a better question is, how accurately does surf media reflect surfing as you experience it?
Well, I mean, I feel like I'm in the it's like the social media bubble where whatever you follow, you just get more of that. It's like the echo chamber. So I follow, I look at, I'm just starting to get into TikTok just because our business is creating a TikTok and that's where the youth are. So I've been like trying to adjust to TikTok, although I'm having a hard time with it. But on Instagram, you know, I follow Stab and brands that I like, but mostly I follow surfers and notice what they're doing, and a lot of like kind of female empowered type media. I like listening to podcasts. I listen to your podcast, obviously. I listen to the Water People podcast. Um but I don't really feel like I consume surf media other than like just consuming the actual feeds from surfers, right? I don't even
Yeah.
know. Is there media anymore? I saw that Surfer Magazine came out with an issue. Like, is that going to continue? I got really excited.
It's not going to continue from the word on the street. That was the ambition was to, that was the first, and they were going to continue to print. And then somebody new came in and just restructured everything immediately. And so put an end to the print as quickly as it started. But yeah, the reason it's what you're doing, your world is dynamic and you got so much going on. I don't see any of that reflected in surf media. Like surf media, does it exist still? Well, it exists in terms of Stab Magazine. Um, Surfline generates content. There's a couple of print publications. Surfing World out of Australia is still printing magazines. They're the longest running, and I think they're at year 60 at this point. Surfer's Journal tells stories, I guess, that are a little bit more nuanced. I mean, Surfing World does as well. But on the internet side, like on the digital side, I see the surfing that they are perpetuating and reflecting is a similar style of surfing that you grew up exposed to through magazines and that I grew up exposed to, which is very homogeneous and not really that diverse. And so I don't know. I think it's great with Instagram now. Like you said, everybody, you can enter surfing from a million different places now with exposed to certain style of things, and then everybody kind of has their own journey through it and in it, and doesn't have the same entry points that we all did at a certain point. So I think that's actually a good thing. But through surf media not reflecting that, I feel like they're continually limiting their market share and their ability to grow.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, a woman that writes for the New York Times, she's like one of their wellness writers. She came on one of the holistic surf coaching retreats and she found it very life-changing, or at least her surf changed. And so she wanted to write a story about it. So she's obviously a very well credentialed writer, New York Times. And she had such a hard time selling the story. And I know she hit up Surfer's Journal, and I think that I didn't see the most recent issue. John had it, but I didn't get a chance to like look at it. But I think he said that there was almost like a similar article in there about
Hmm.
like the mental health side of surfing from a female perspective. So maybe that's why they didn't pick up her story, because they already had something in the works. But I feel like they don't even tell that many women's stories, and it eventually ran in Surfline with like a lot of edits, but I felt like she told me that it was really hard to get that story out there. And her story, it wasn't like a profile on me, it was like about her experience and talking about how, I think the angle was to normalize that surfing's not always fun, because it seems like from surf media that the story they're telling is that surfing's always fun. Like it should be always fun. And if you're not having fun, you shouldn't do it. And that, yeah, maybe you're scared and you're pushing yourself in big waves, and that would be a time where maybe it's not that fun. But like she wanted to normalize that we all go through these big emotions in surfing, like, and that part doesn't get talked about. Like maybe localism gets talked about, or being a kook gets talked about to some extent, but not in the same way that I think the overall story that we get told is that when you go surfing, you feel better. And I think that that's true. I mean, that's my early story, was I went surfing because it made me feel good. And part of what surf therapy is too, is like you go surfing because it feels good and being in the ocean feels good and you're getting exercise and endorphins and, you know, adrenaline and all these things. But also, surfing can be really frustrating and it's not always fun. And there's all these lineup dynamics. And sometimes you feel awesome. And the other days you just, your board's not working, your feet aren't in the right place, or you don't know what's going on, but you can't surf at all like you normally can. And that's what doesn't get talked about. And I feel like it just gets glamorized as like what you were saying. It's like young, hot, shredding surfers, if they're
Yeah.
female and or male, you know, it's like the young and hot ones who are ripping are getting all of the spotlight, which is great. But there, that other side of the story is not getting told. And I get it, it's not as sexy, it's not as interesting, but it's sure as a hell a lot more relatable.
Well, I haven't read her article. I don't know what the uh, end of it is, but in my experience, it's worth doing. Even when it's not fun, there is a reason that I'm doing it and a payoff in the end. And so push-ups also are not fun. But it's pretty good at the end of a year if I did push-ups throughout that year. I'm better off because of it, you know? And so surfing is more fun than push-ups, but it also has all of this kind of latent benefit down the road for my well-being.
Right. And I think that the argument is that everyone knows push-ups aren't fun and nobody's going to shame you for saying push-ups aren't fun. Like everybody's going to acknowledge that push-ups kind of suck, but you do them because it makes you stronger and you feel good afterwards. And the difference in surfing is that if if you say, "Hey, surfing's not fun," like I didn't have surfing today, then the general response is going to be like, "Then you shouldn't be doing it."
Yeah.
So the goal is to like normalize that, yes, surfing is amazing, but also surfing can sometimes not be fun. And that doesn't mean you should, that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong if
Yeah.
you're acknowledging that you're not always having fun surfing. And that was what she said that she came away with after the retreat with me. It was like she felt like she was doing something wrong or there was something wrong with her, or anytime she would express to someone previously that like she was having a struggle in the water, that the common response is like, well, you're not doing it right or you shouldn't be doing it. And so her goal was to like normalize that's not the case.
Gotcha. At the age of 44, where is your surfing at? Are you improving? Is there potential that your best surfing is still ahead of you?
um I feel like I'm a better surfer now than I was 10 years ago. I feel like my like ocean knowledge and my ability, particularly in the barrel, has improved. And I'm not trying so hard to like rip and shred. And so I think I like look smoother and I'm riding different boards. And like my characterization of surfing, like the things that I value in surfing, I think are improving and will continue to improve. But like I don't know if I would like if I would be any better at winning heats now than I used to be. Like if I showed myself video of myself now to my like 25-year-old self, would she think that I was surfing better now than before? I don't know. Maybe in the barrel. But I just, you know, in the last few years, I feel like I've noticed a change in my body, you know, like being 44 and like that little twinge in my back that used to be there only sometimes seems to be there annoyingly more often. And just my kids are 8 and 10 and they're getting in. My son likes to surf, but he's now playing soccer and we live in a place where I don't surf every day. And so I don't know. I feel like I'm in like a kind of a downhill as far as my fitness and strength goes, but my boyfriend is about to move in and he's a frother, so that'll be a good thing for my surfing because he'll be encouraging me to surf more. So we'll see. I like the way I'm surfing now more. I feel like my mental side of surfing is better. Like I've gotten to a point where I need surfing less, and that feels good. Like I don't have as much. I used to have really, really bad FOMO, like to the point where it was toxic. And I
Yeah.
feel like let that go and that makes me happier in the water. And now if I'm feeling annoyed with the crowd or the waves, I just go in and that's fine. And so if I look at surfing holistically, I feel like I'm better now and I'm going to keep getting better. But if I'm just looking at it from like how much spray I threw, I don't know if I continue improving.
Are you doing anything in regard to diet and exercise that is going to allow you to extend your surfing life?
I should be. Nah. I stopped drinking. I stopped drinking about a year ago, and I'll still have a cocktail here and there, but I'm not like I was never somebody that I would say had a problem with alcohol where I like need to like it's not like if I have one, I'm gonna have 10, but I started noticing that I was like having a cocktail, a rum drink. The rum's so good down here. I was having a rum drink almost every single night. And once I quit that habit, I feel better. And I really notice if I even have one, how it affects my body. And so if I've done anything, it's that I've given up drinking.
Smart. Um, whose surfing do you admire?
I admire people who are drawing smooth lines on funky boards and having a lot of fun or appear to be having fun. So I love Stephanie Gilmore stepping away from competition. I like watching Mikey February. My all-time favorite surfer for a long time was Ryan Birch because I felt like he was the most amazing at riding absolutely everything with a huge smile on his face. Like so that those like iconic clips of him in where is he in Chile riding the twin fin, taking that high line, or like if I could surf like anybody, I want to surf like that. But I think I find like inspiration from all kinds of people around me. Like my boyfriend is John, as who you know, and a podcast host in the Surf Splendor network, and his cutback is so amazing. So I think I just like, yeah, I find influences by sometimes it's just the beginner that's got the most amazing smile on her face, like going down the wave. And I feel like it's nice to remember what it felt like to just like be locked into the sheer joy of going down the line with a huge smile. So yeah, finding influences all around me.
Beautiful. And final question is, what was the last surfboard you rode, and or whose boards are you riding?
Yeah, I got a board from one of John's friends, JT. He has these asymmetrical boards, and um I got this new board that's so sick. It's so awesome. It's what is it? It's a 5'9", and it's got like the twin fin on the heel side and like the no, sorry, like the quad on the heel side and like the twin fin on the toe side. And it's a little narrower and probably a little thicker than the boards I have been riding. It's epoxy and it's so fast. And I just like feeling something different. And I rode Rusty's for the bulk of my career, and I love and respect Rusty and his boards. And when I took a break from them in Central America, and then I went back to them when I was living in California. But I feel like yeah, he's a little bit stuck in the traditional mindset. Is it was a little hard to get him to make me exactly what I wanted. And yeah, I'm really excited about getting like a lot of asymmetrical boards. John and I are gonna go to Mandiri in the spring in Indo in Sumatra, and it's got like hollow beach break and also point breaks. And I've been like really thinking like, oh, I'm gonna go on this big trip to Indo, and I got to order a new quiver, and what am I gonna get? And I was like, maybe I'm just gonna get all asymmetrical boards.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting rabbit hole to get into. And I feel like obviously JT's been doing them for a fair bit. And so he's a great guy to work with because you almost need a custom. I think you do need a custom if you're going to get an ASIM. You can't buy it off the rack. Um, so that's probably the way to go. Somebody who's actually got experience, Birch or Brink or
Why do you think you can't get an ASIM off the rack? What makes an ASIM different than any other board as far as getting one off the rack, other than like goofy versus regular?
well, I could make an argument that you should buy everything custom and that the off the rack is going to be kind of very general in design and probably not the best for a specific person. But when it comes, I think the asymmetrical adjustments are even more specific. That becomes even more important to your body type, your foot, your placement, all that sort of thing. There's so many variables at play once you start making those asymmetrical adjustments that if the surfer happens to be front footed instead of back footed or whatever, then that you would need to design to account for that. So I think it's best if you know the surfer.
That makes sense. The one thing I like about getting boards off the rack is you can actually like feel them. Between like Rusty, like I have such a hard time like visualizing what's on the computer screen and like how that's going to come out to the board. And I haven't bought a board off a rack in a long time, but it has been something I've been thinking about. Wouldn't it be nice to like go into one of those like fat surf shops that has like all the things and just go find the one that like feels good under your arm? Because it is still, even JT is a great shaper and he's been doing it a long time, but there is still that gamble of like, are the rails going to come out like the way, like knifey enough, without it being like too thin?
Yeah.
But I'm going to see because I'm going to put an order in.
Yeah, good. Um, just for listeners who haven't ever ridden an asymmetrical board, can you identify what felt different about it, or did it feel like you needed to adjust your surfing for an asymmetrical board?
I think the theory is that you push differently off your toes than you do off your heels. So there's design differences meant to like maximize the amount of force, I guess, or the flex.
Leverage.
Leverage, is that the word? Yeah. And so on mine too, like the toe edge has like a longer rail line, and then the heel edge is like kind of shorter and like softer. So you have like the longer rail to push against on your toe side, but when you go to do your cutback into your heel side, it comes around a little quicker and easier because it's like shorter and softer. And I mean, I'm so used to doing cutbacks on like regular symmetrical boards that I wouldn't say that I felt like my regular board was lacking. You just get used to it. But in riding the ASIM board, I did like the way it felt that when I did, go transition onto the heel edge, it just came around so much more quickly. So I did like that feeling. I need to ride it more. I just got it and I rode it in Florida a few times in sort of average waves. And then I rode it at Pavones last week in kind of pumping waves. And I wasn't really sure how it was going to feel. And it just felt I wasn't doing any cutbacks. I was just going as fast as I could down the line and like getting some little tubes on it. And then I took it to this other wave in that zone that is a little slower and allows you to do cutbacks. And again, I was just like, oh my God, it just felt amazing. And
Yeah.
so I felt like I need to ride it more to be able to better articulate exactly the little things I'm feeling. But the overall feeling was like, wee, this is so fun. I love this board. And I was like, I gotta order some more of these. I want to get a shorter, wider one and maybe like a longer step up one. And I'm excited to play with it more.
Sweet. Well, I think it's JT Handshapes on Instagram for anybody who wants to give him a follow or check out his boards.
Yeah, but don't order too many because he makes them all by hand and I want to get some. No, definitely.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much, Holly. What a you phenomenal communicator. So that helps for the podcast medium. I really appreciate you sharing all of it.
Thank you so much. I loved your questions. Some interesting ones that I hadn't asked or hadn't answered in a while.
Okay, cool. Well, have a great rest of the day. Good luck with the illness in the house.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Surf Splendor.